Welcome to the 5th Annual Purpose-Built Communities Conference. It is fabulous to see you all here, and I have to confess to being slightly emotionally overwhelmed by seeing so many people who I admire and love from all around the country here together to think about and improve on ways to build healthy, vibrant communities to help families break the cycle of poverty. My name is Redmon Naughton. I'm a Senior Vice President with Purpose Built, and I have the great honor of walking through the Purpose Built model with all of you. But knowing who's in the room, I think half of you could in fact give this presentation. Nevertheless, I appreciate you being here and your support in this process. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping matters, the first of which I only have a vague understanding of. We are on Twitter. You can follow the conversation and chime in using hashtag PurposeBuilt2014, and we will be also on @PurposeBuiltCS. Now, I'm not exactly sure what all that means, but how many of you in here know what that meant? Excellent, excellent. Thank you all for being here. Before we get started, I just want to kind of get a sense of who's in the room. How many of you are associated with organizations that we refer to as lead organizations or community quarterbacks? If you're a lead organization, community quarterback person, raise your hand. If you are an educator, raise your hand. If you are a houser, raise your hand. If you're here from health and wellness, raise your hand. Excellent, excellent. So we've got a lot of folks with diverse backgrounds here, and we're going to just jump right in. I'm going to try to do this pretty quickly, and I want to get done in time for questions and answers. But like I said, I believe most of you can do this presentation. Let's see if we can get this going. Yes. All right. Y'all, I don't need to spend much time on this with you all. If I can master my technology. There we go. Poverty continues to be an overwhelming challenge in our country. 50 years after LBJ declared a war on poverty, we have won some important battles, but we have not yet won the war. Almost 50 million Americans live in poverty in this country. That's 1 in 10 Americans. And what we have found now is that our society is much less mobile than it used to be. So if you're born into poverty without either some serious luck or a really thoughtful intervention, you are likely to end and live your entire life in poverty. Children experience poverty at even higher rates than adults. About 1 in 4 American children live in poverty, and 50% of low-income kids live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. And those are the neighborhoods that we care about here in Purpose-Built Communities. Neighborhoods of concentrated poverty that, as the economists described, have become swamps rather than launch pads, where children and families are stuck in place and unable to move forward. Our goal is to change those swamps into launch pads. You see the odds that we're fighting. 86% of third graders who live in concentrated poverty cannot read at grade level in third grade. 86%. Doug Judy, who is somewhere in this room, shared with us that not only is this a really important predictor of a child's likelihood that they will graduate from high school and have an economically viable future, it is also perhaps the most important early indicator of a child and a community's health going forward. So we're talking about incredibly important fundamental rights, fundamental parts of being a human being with this kind of dynamic in place that prevents people from reaching their full potential. Now, if the social justice aspect doesn't speak to you, perhaps the economic piece will. We lose $500 billion per year in this country, year after year, as a result of the consequences of childhood poverty. Think about that. Now, just a few years ago, we had something called the TARP. And I don't want to think about whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. I just want to think about the scale of it. That was a $700 billion bailout program, one time, that was virtually all going to be repaid. And think about how nuts the whole country went over that. Here we're losing $500 billion every year. Where is the outrage? Y'all are part of the outrage. Y'all are part of the movement to end this kind of travesty. So what does our movement mean? Our movement is about place and it is about people. It is about creating healthy, viable neighborhoods that create a pathway to prosperity for everyone, that allow everyone to reach their full potential. And it starts with Eastlake. The Eastlake story we'll review quickly, then we'll look at what the model is, and then we'll talk about some of the work going on with network members around the country. Here's Eastlake back in 1995. Is Shannon Longino here with us? Shannon here yet? Shannon will be here. Shannon grew up in Eastlake Meadows and was the granddaughter of Eva Davis, and we'll hear from her on Wednesday. But in Eastlake back in 1995, it was a community in extraordinary distress based on virtually every measure. With crime rate 18 times the national average. This is the one that gets me every year. Thinking almost every family was going to be the victim of a felony every year. Think about what that feels like. Think about when you get up in the morning, what is it going to feel like if you're worried about, is it my day? Is it my mother's day? Is it my grandma's day? Is it my brother's day? How can you focus on school? How can you focus on moving up the food chain when you're worried about such fundamental issues? Andy Young used to say that the only place that the haves and the have-nots came together in Eastlake was over the $35 million a year drug trade. The housing stock was in really deplorable condition. It was 100% public housing that had by far outlived its useful life. There were about 1,400 residents in 650 apartments, although 40% of those apartments were in fact uninhabitable by HUD's very basic standards. Adults were really disconnected from what was then a very thriving Atlanta economy. Only 13% of adults worked. Most adults relied on welfare as their primary source of income, and the average income for families was about $4,500 a year. But it's when we looked at the education outcomes that we saw that the longer children lived in Eastlake and the longer they attended neighborhood schools, the further behind they fell. Only 5% of fifth graders can meet state math standards, and less than 30% of young people graduated from high school. And we know that many of those young people who had in fact graduated were not prepared to be successful in either college or career. But frankly, I will tell you something. The fact that things were in such bad shape in Eastlake was in some ways very freeing, because it was clear to all of us who were sitting around the planning table, the residents of Eastlake Meadows, the Atlanta Housing Authority, where I worked at that time, and this newly created organization called the Eastlake Foundation. When we came together to plan, we knew that tinkering around the edges was not going to create new outcomes for families in the community. Whipping a new after-school program in Eastlake was not going to break the cycle of poverty, was not going to change outcomes and dynamics in the community. And so we had a chance to step back and say, if we could do it differently and we could start over, how would we do it? And this is what we did. Would you please cue this?
Two guys got in a fight right across in front of my house. I saw one peep his head around the corner, pow, pow, pow. It was just like you was in a movie, Western movie.
Eva Davis moved into Atlanta's Eastlake Meadows housing project in 1971. It wasn't long before murder and mayhem became a way of life.
He ran right by my car and blood was just shooting out of his body. That guy shot him and he fell dead right before my face.
The 650-unit housing project was never great, but when drugs took over and gangs claimed turf, it went from bad to horrible in a hurry.
They would shoot and cut and stab and kill each other. That's what they did.
By 1995, the crime rate was 18 times the national average. This was Eastlake 10 years ago, and this is Eastlake today. Torn down, rebuilt, utterly transformed. Clean, safe, family-friendly. This was a pretty hellish place.
Pretty
And now?
is heaven.
You just heard from Eva Davis, who is the president of the Eastlake Meadows Residents Association. Ms. Davis had been president of the Resident Association for 40 years before we started the revitalization. She was in fact the gatekeeper into Eastlake, and the planning process really involved building trust and relationships with Ms. Davis and the other residents on the planning committee. Miss Davis died 2 years ago this summer, and I want to tell you that if she were still here with us, she would be in this room doing this presentation, not me, and you would all be enjoying it a whole lot more. She was really an extraordinary person. So here we are today. Things have changed a lot in Eastlake, and not just visually, not just the way the community looks, but fundamentally things have changed. Crime is down dramatically, over a 70% reduction in crime overall and a 90% reduction in violent crime. What used to be the most dangerous neighborhood in Atlanta is now one of the safest. The housing stock is dramatically different. We still refer to the housing in Eastlake as new housing, although it's 15 years old. But it's lovely. It remains lovely 15 years in. We are believers in mixed income housing, and in our case, mixed income is 50% public housing assisted and 50% market rate. Every building, 50-50. You can't tell based on where somebody lives whether they receive a rent subsidy or not. And there's about 1,400 people who live in the 542 mixed income apartments. Employment is up dramatically. Virtually everyone who's not elderly or disabled works, and it's a requirement in Eastlake. And what we have found in 15 years of operating housing with a work requirement is that we've never needed to evict anybody for a failure to work. People want to work. They need support, they need a little help now and again, but families, adults want to work, and with the support they can be very successful, even transitioning from places where they had never worked before. The median income for the families who continue to receive public housing assistance in Eastlake is still only $15,000 a year, 4 times higher than it was back in 1995, but as HUD would define it, extremely low income. It's, I would say, one of our lessons learned is it is easier to help families get that first job and that lower wage job coming off of welfare than it is to help them move up the food chain to that second and third and fourth higher job. It's around education, though, that we're really excited about what we're seeing. Children in the Eastlake education pipeline are excelling by every measure. There are now 1,560 children in Charles R. Drew Charter School that starts at pre-K and now goes through 10th grade. Our first graduating class will be in May of 2017. 98% of children meet or exceed state standards in all subjects. It's now become a top performing school in Atlanta and the state. And this is why we are convinced that children who grow up in our community, who are taking advantage of the opportunities, will in fact break the cycle of poverty. So I was the executive director of the Eastlake Foundation from 2001 through 2008. And during that time, we focused on making all the pieces that were part of the Eastlake revitalization work together. The housing, the new early learning center, the First Tee program, the YMCA, a variety of social service programs, and of course the most important, the school. And as we got better at it, children and families kept doing better. And as a result, people from all over the country, including many of you, came to Eastlake and they said, this is really cool, we want to do it too. And so we had to step back and say, well, what did we in fact do? And how do we think about it at a 30,000 foot level? And it became very clear to us that we had a very, very clear model for neighborhood revitalization. Now, clear doesn't necessarily mean easy, but it is a clear model for neighborhood revitalization. First, I want to emphasize neighborhood. This is a neighborhood strategy. It's not citywide, it's not region-wide, it's not county-wide. It's a deep dive into a neighborhood. Within that neighborhood, over a period of, say, 10 years, there are 3 strategic investments that we made. First, we replaced the low-income housing that had outlived its useful life with really high-quality mixed-income housing. Second, we built a really robust cradle-to-college education pipeline. And third, we looked at community wellness. What were the kinds of programs and facilities that were necessary so that every person in the community could reach their full potential? But it's the secret sauce that we created called the Eastlake Foundation, which served as the community quarterback to make sure that all of these pieces were working together, that captured the community vision that had been created in that very robust planning process, and kept all the partners moving forward to implement in a way that made sense for the community and helped everyone reach their full potential. So let's talk about all those pieces for just a few minutes. First, mixed income housing. We are complete believers in mixed income housing. You don't always have the opportunity to replace 100% low income housing with mixed income, but when you do, please do. It ensures higher standards in design, development, and operation. If every resident is treated as if they can vote with their feet and leave, everyone gets better services. Most importantly, the low-income families who've never had that kind of service delivery before. Second, mixed income attracts additional investment to the community. We know that there will never be enough government or philanthropic money in the world in order to be able to do all the things that need to happen to create healthy neighborhoods. We've got to find ways to stimulate private investment and make these neighborhoods places where people want to invest both their time and their money. And perhaps most importantly, and this is always hard to talk about, but it's true, it helps to destigmatize a neighborhood. We've all heard of really sad circumstances where a teacher, for example, may have looked at a child's address and said, oh, that child lives in the projects. He's not going to be able to learn at high standards or high levels. Or we've seen an employer look at somebody's job application and say, oh, she's from that neighborhood. She's not going to be reliable. When you reposition a neighborhood as a neighborhood of choice, the people who benefit the most are the lowest income families. Oops, let me back up. The second piece, implement a cradle through college education pipeline. And I have become such a believer in the education pipeline. We like to think that this happens automatically, but what we have realized is co-location does not a pipeline make. It takes a lot of real intense focused effort to tie all these pieces together, even just within the education piece. So in our model, well, first of all, we love public schools. I'm a public school kid. My mom taught in a public school. My kids went to public schools, and my son is working on his master's to become a teacher in a public school. But we also recognize that sometimes public school districts have a hard time treating one school differently than others. And so charters can often be a really great resource in building a cradle through college education pipeline, because a charter school can be more nimble than a district and make decisions that are reacting to the realities of a particular neighborhood and a particular student population. We've also, though, to our great happiness, have discovered that there are public school systems who want to do the same thing. And so now some of our network members are working in concert with their local public school system to create schools that will, in fact, be more responsive to the needs of children in their neighborhood. So we are cautiously optimistic that the districts will be able to take the lessons that we've learned in the charter school world and apply them in neighborhoods in which they are partners. Second, we believe neighborhood schools are really important. It's almost impossible to have a healthy and sustainable neighborhood without a great neighborhood school. Schools are part of the glue and the grease that connect us. They bring us together to celebrate our children, and there's nothing that replaces that. You can have a lovely neighborhood without a great public school, but it won't be the same as a neighborhood that has a fabulous public school in it. We've also learned about the importance of high quality early learning. We're talking about the kind of early learning that can close the 30 million word gap. Tomorrow we'll hear from Dr. Jack Shonkoff, who's really the expert in our country on the science behind how brains develop and the stress that living in poverty can put on a child's brain, and the things that we can all do together to help insulate children's brains so they can all reach their highest potential. But high quality early learning is absolutely essential. And again, as I said, co-location does not a pipeline make. We've got to find ways to connect all these pieces so each operator of every program has a vested interest in the success of the people on the other side of the pipeline. We can talk about some examples of that later. I'm going to brag on the kids in Eastlake at Drew Charter School. Now, sometimes we in Eastlake and at Purpose Built use the word Drew as a shortcut to say the Eastlake intervention. Because what we're seeing these great results, but they're not just because we have a great school in the neighborhood. They're because we have a great neighborhood intervention, and we see the results first and foremost at Drew Charter School. So when we first opened Drew Charter School in September of 2000, the 2001 school year, the lowest performing school in Atlanta. We were crushed. We thought in 2 or 3 short years we could go from worst to first. We were so naive. We realized, though, it was going to take slow, steady work, making changes, getting better at what we do, being better coordinated to help kids move forward and reach their full potential. And what we see 10 years later, that's happened. And now Drew Charter School is one of the very highest performing schools in the Atlanta public school system. This is a great chart. This demonstrates the point I was just making, that it doesn't happen overnight. And I would dare say, if it is happening overnight, look closely at it. You can see the pathway. These are different subjects: social studies, science, math, English language, arts, and reading. Average grades 3 through 5 over the last 10 years. And you can see where we started and where we've ended up. Let me see if I can make my little thing. Okay. See this little place right here where we got to that really high level of almost 100% in every subject? That's when people in our neighborhood who had choice about where they sent their kids to school started to choose Drew Charter School as their school. So we got to this very high level right here with a school population that was over 80% free and reduced lunch. And then the next couple of years, the kids from the neighborhood whose family had choice followed the lower income kids to the school. This may be the most important slide I show you about Eastlake. And let me share with you what we've got on this. These are the highest performing schools in the Atlanta public school system. You see Charles Drew on the left, and then Brandon, Jackson, Morningside, Springdale, Park, Sarah Smith, and Maryland. All those other schools, those are the she schools in Atlanta. Everybody knows who they are. Everybody wants their kids to go to them. They are absolutely terrific schools. The black line at about 87%, that's the average level of performance for the state of Georgia. And that red line below 80% is the average rate in the city of Atlanta public school system. So you see that Drew and Brandon and Jackson and these other schools, they're performing at the very highest levels. But look down at the bottom part of that chart. You see the free and reduced lunch percentage. Drew's free and reduced lunch percentage last year was over 60%. And it is performing at the same level or outperforming all these other schools that serve very few children of low wealth. This is a really cool thing that we've just looked at starting last week. Look at the bottom line, average list price of a home in the neighborhoods that are served by the schools. In Eastlake, the average sales price of a home now is about $268,000. In Brandon, it's $1.8 million. In Jackson, it's $1.8 million. Morningside, $475,000. Springdale, $649,000. Sarah Smith, $1.2 million. Maryland, $484,000. Our kids are competing successfully against kids who come from neighborhoods where the average sales price of a house are these astronomical numbers. In fact, this is one of my favorite slides. Drew's low-income kids outperform the non-low-income kids in the city of Atlanta and in the state of Georgia. Let me say that again. Our low-income kids are outperforming the non-low-income kids in both the city and the state. Not just closing the achievement gap, but in fact eliminating it. I know. I get goosebumps every time I say that. When I ask our principal and our educators about why kids are doing so well in Eastlake, the first thing they say has to do with things happening outside of the school. So the first thing they'll say, it's because we're part of a coordinated, comprehensive community revitalization strategy. The teachers and the principals no longer feel like they have to do it on their own. They've got partners in the community who are really making a difference. Second, we've really invested in high quality language and literacy starting at the very earliest levels. Extraordinary focus on and foundation on language and literacy, which means that when every child arrives in kindergarten, they have closed that 30 million word gap. That's our goal, close the 30 million word gap. Again, the focus on high quality early learning education, really high quality early learning. We'll hear some about that over the next day from Dr. Sean Koff and from others. The kind of high quality early learning that closes the 30 million word gap, works on social, emotional, and academic preparation for children, again, so they are prepared to be successful in kindergarten. We make an investment in teachers, a huge investment in teachers. Not only do they make a little bit more money if they teach at Drew Charter School, but we invest in their professional development. Every single day, teachers at Drew have embedded professional development. So we're attracting people who want to be great teachers and who already are great teachers and who want to be even better teachers. So that investment in high quality leaders and teachers is extraordinary. The last few years, we moved into a STEAM and project-based learning environment. Honestly, the first few years that we were starting, we were focused on remediation. How do we help kids catch up who are 3, 4, 5 years behind? And then we got to the point where kids were catching up. We said, what kind of school design would help children really excel? And our education leaders did a lot of research, and they determined that the STEAM model, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, along with project-based learning, would help all kids learn at very high levels, and that we've seen that to be absolutely the case. We believe the arts make kids smarter, and too many places we're finding people cutting back on the arts because of budget issues, but arts make kids smarter. Arts help everybody get excited. Now, I would dare say that for everybody in this room, you had at least one day in your academic career where it wasn't the academics that got you to school, right? It was art, it was band, it was sports, it was something other than what was going on in the classroom that got you to school. Having that richness embedded in your education is part of what helps get us all there when, gosh, we're getting beaten up by, science or math. We get there one day and surprise, we learn, we get there and we can move forward. But that enrichment really makes a difference. And the last thing, again, this is a list that came from our principal, the public-private partnerships that are helping kids at Drew Charter School succeed. So we have great, robust partnerships between universities and Drew Charter School, like the seismic program at Georgia Tech. I'm not going to get the acronym right, so I'm not going to try, but this program at Georgia Tech embeds professional development with all of our teachers around computing, engineering, math, and science. So all of our teachers are getting this really specialized professional development to help them be better at the sciences. We've got a wonderful partnership with the Atlanta Speech School and the Rollins Center for Language and Learning that helps all of our teachers really learn how to teach language and learning in very specific ways. And we think that this is one of the most important things we have done as a school to help all children reach their very highest potential. We've got a number of other partnerships, but I only have an hour with you now. Let's see. Okay, so we've talked about neighborhood intervention. We've talked about mixed income housing. We've talked about cradle through college education. And the third piece is around health and wellness. Now, health and wellness is health and wellness writ large. It's not just including a medical clinic. It's not just health care. It's health writ large. What are the kinds of things that are getting in the way of children and families meeting their full potential? Who are the partners who can help remove those obstacles and bring programs to bear that really help everybody maximize their full potential? If you had asked us 5 years ago whether we were in the health business, we would have said, oh no, we're community developers. But now we understand that community developers are in fact in the health and wellness business. We are the arms and legs of folks in the community and public health world. And so what we do is really important in terms of improving health outcomes for everyone in America. I want to point out to our friend Doug Judy, we'll be doing a session later this week on creating a marketplace that values health. And I really encourage you to attend that. There'll be some really great information there about how we can do that and potentially how we can finance some of this. So health and wellness, again, health writ large, not just a medical clinic, but what are the kinds of things that every community needs and that families in your community specifically need in order to be able to move forward? In Eastlake, there was a history of golf in the community. So one of the programs for children is a First Tee program that not only teaches kids how to play a great game of golf, and we've got a bunch of kids in college now on golf scholarships, but teaches the kinds of values that are really helpful both on and off the golf course. So if you don't show up on time, for example, you miss your tee time, you don't play. If you're not dressed appropriately, you don't play. And the other thing that I think is so important, if you, nobody's born good at golf. Anybody here ever know anyone who is born good at golf? You have to practice in order to get good at the game, so you learn the value of perseverance. But the thing I like most about watching kids in our First Tee program play golf is when they hit a boneheaded shot off the tee and end up in the woods. And they're in bad shape, and you know, it'd be easy to fall apart and just say, oh, woe is me, I'm out of this tournament. But what I love to watch is when they pull themselves together and hit the next shot to get back in the middle of the fairway. Because that's, in my mind, that's what life is all about. How you make corrections after you've made a mistake. Do you let it get you down, or do you find a way to get back in the game? And that's what our things like golf programs can teach kids. Health and wellness. Our friends in Indianapolis. Anybody here from Indy yet? They could be giving this presentation. They just built this great new health and wellness center in partnership between Indiana University's HealthNet and the YMCA. So they've got both a medical care facility as well as a health and wellness center in the same building in a community that had not had access to great quality health and wellness support. And the Publix grocery store. Gosh, when it opened November 15th, 2001 in Eastlake, I thought people were going to be tired. You know, we'd had the YMCA, we'd had the school, we'd had the housing. People went crazy when we opened the new grocery store because there hadn't been a grocery store in the community in 40 years. So those are the kinds of things that people continue to get excited about. Now, the lead organization. Now, remind me, how many in here are part of a lead organization? Okay, good handful, excellent. So you guys are the community quarterbacks. You have worked to create a public and community planning process that creates a community vision. As a newly created not-for-profit, you focus on making sure that vision really happens. Make sure all those programs are coordinated and connected and seamless, that they're delivered at extraordinarily high qualities, because we all know too often in low-income neighborhoods, there's a mentality of good enough. Good enough is not good enough. Families in the neighborhoods that we care about deserve the best. You're struggling to find braiding a funding stream so you can pay for this long term, and you actually serve as a point of accountability to all those funders out in the world. We think that this lead organization concept is one of the most important pieces and one of the reasons that both Eastlake and you all will be successful in this work. Has anybody lived through the particular hell of renovating your home? Anybody done that? When you renovated your home, you and your family had a vision for what you wanted your home to look and feel like. But when it was time to do that, you didn't just invite the subcontractors to sit around your kitchen table and figure out what they were going to do when for how much money. You hired a general contractor whose job was to take the vision that you and your family had and translate it into action through the relationships with the subcontractors. That's what a lead organization does. It takes that community vision and translates it into action through all the partners that you have in making this happen. Your housing partners, your real estate partners, your education partners, your early learning partners, your health and wellness partners, and getting them all to work together in a coordinated, effective way to deliver on that community vision. So when somebody asks us, how do we know if this model can be successful in any place? We look at 3 big blocks to start. The first one is around leadership. If you have leadership, most of the rest can follow. Do you have strong civic and business leaders, faith-based leaders who say, this model resonates with me, and I'm willing to spend some of my time, my talents, and potentially my chits and my treasure to make this happen in a neighborhood? Second, we look at the conditions in a particular neighborhood. Is there an opportunity to do mixed income housing at scale that can make the neighborhood look and feel very different and provide great quality housing for families across a broad range of incomes? Can you attract moderate income families into the neighborhood. And sometimes that's hard to visualize on the front end because it's been a long time since people with choice have lived in a neighborhood. But if you look at what those other assets are, what the assets are around your neighborhood, you might be surprised at what you can come up with. On education, is there the potential for local control of a school, whether through a charter or through a contract? All of our network members who are working with traditional public schools have contracts or memorandums of agreement with those school systems about how that school will be operated and how it will be different from a traditional public school. Those are the three things that we look for. And if those three things kind of start to fall in place, then this might be a place where the purpose-built model can be very successful. We've talked about this being a neighborhood model. Let me talk about what a neighborhood means. So this is a map of the city of Atlanta. This little thing right here, this little appendage you see where my green dot is shaking, that's that orange block right here, about 175 acres. Almost all of the investment in Eastlake was on that 175 acres, all the investment in physical capital, new housing, new school, new early learning. It served families in a broader area, all around here, if you see, in the Eastlake and Kirkwood neighborhood. In fact, there's about 12,300 people who live in this broader neighborhood who are all served by the early learning programs, by the school, by the YMCA, who get to go shopping at the Publix and take advantage of the investment that's been made. But by concentrating the investment in a very small area, we created a sense of place. Created a place where people wanted to come from, where it felt like there was something significant going on there. Too often in community development projects, we've scattered the physical infrastructure too broadly through a neighborhood, and you never get to that sense of place. And so we want to encourage you to be investing in a small area, serving people in a broader area, but making that sense of place with your real estate investment. By the way, I should point out, in that area, in that Eastlake Kirkwood neighborhood, there had not been a building permit issued in that neighborhood in 27 years before we got started. The average sales price of a home in that neighborhood before we got started was $45,000. Now it's about $268,000. We've seen Eastlake become a place where people want to invest their time and their money. And that's, according to NeighborWorks, the definition of a healthy neighborhood. In the first 10 years alone, we saw a lot of investment in the surrounding neighborhood. We saw new houses, renovated houses, new grocery stores, branch banks, over $200 million in investment that we didn't have anything to do with, that came to the neighborhood because Eastlake, again, was now perceived as a place where you wanted to invest your time and your money. So, I want to revisit our model. You all could do this presentation, half of you in here. So, a defined neighborhood, mixed income housing, a cradle through college education pipeline, and community wellness connected to one another through this strong lead organization that serves as the community quarterback. Now, Eastlake's not the only place where this is happening now. There are 10 network members who are doing this, and I'm going to talk about two of them right now. New Orleans. I saw JT. Where's JT? There he is back there. From the Bayou District Foundation, Lisa from the Bayou District Foundation, and I know Jerry Bruce will be joining us shortly. This was really the first opportunity, this really created the opportunity for purpose-built. After Hurricane Katrina, the neighborhood, the St. Bernard Public Housing Community, was under 8 feet of water for 21 days. The neighborhood was destroyed. Jerry and two of his colleagues came to Atlanta to visit Eastlake and said, we're going to bring this model back and figure out how we can make this the basis for part of the rebuild in New Orleans. And they've done just that. They've partnered with Columbia Residential on the housing. They've built beautiful, beautiful mixed income housing that takes upon what we learned in Eastlake and makes it work at an even higher level. In their case, for example, 1/3 of their units are reserved for families who qualify for public housing assistance. Another third are rented to low-income families who qualify for the low-income housing tax credit rents. And then the remaining 1/3 are rented at the very highest market rents that the market will bear. And as a result, they have created a new mixed income community. Over 675 apartments built so far. They want to get up to about 900 new housing units. They've opened the first Educare early learning center in the Deep South. It is amazing. Children are learning at extraordinarily high levels. They're in pre-development now, negotiating with a charter school to build a K-8 school on their footprint. And as we speak, a new public high school is being built right in the neighborhood. So it's going to be a cool model on the education side that starts with EduCare, transitions to a K-8 charter school, and then goes back to a college prep high school. On the community wellness side, working with the YMCA, a local grocery store, and there's already a health clinic up and running. But one of the most exciting things that they're doing is really taking a lead on restoring City Park, which is one of the largest public parks in the country, 1,400 acres, bigger than Central Park, like twice as big as Central Park, 3 times as big as Central Park in New York City. And they're using golf, which had historically been part of the City Park infrastructure, to create an income stream that will continue to generate cash that will support neighborhood serving programs. I mean, just brilliant, just doing a great job. In Indianapolis, our colleagues there started with 2 high-performing charter schools and realized that the neighborhood wasn't really a neighborhood with just the charter schools operating kind of in a vacuum, doing great work, but not tied to the community. And so together, they have been able to build the first 250 units of mixed income housing, expect to be able to build 600 units ultimately. Now I think there are 4 charter schools in the neighborhood, including a new KIPP and an Excel charter school that Goodwill operates that serves adults that had formerly dropped out of school. They've got high quality early learning and that health and wellness center that I showed you early on. They're really doing great work, and it's spectacular. So we've got network members all over the country. We're dancing with another 20 cities or so. And when Greg does his State of the Union tomorrow, you hear more details about who you all are and where you are all from. So thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing you all over the next couple of days. Thank you for being here.